Welcome back at WNST. John and Lou and Brady Anderson and Dan Duquette and Buck Showalter and all of the players. We have come to the portion of our programming here with Luke Jones where we take on the guy that, this will be talked about this year, next year, the year after that. This will be the story that keeps going on long after Peter Angelos is no longer with us. Chris Davis will still be getting paid by the Orioles. I know we shake our heads. We've talked about his swing. We've talked about him not being a legitimate Major League Baseball player anymore and what the long-term situation is here, but we shall do it again as part of our Dear Orioles series. Luke, bringing you into this thing with Chris Davis, I am still, for all of the frugality, for all of the strange, unorthodox, wacky stuff that the creepy old man who owns the team has done here over 25 years, giving $150 million, $161 million to a guy who was not available when the bell rang for them to go win a championship, it's sort of otherworldly to me. It's sort of mind-blowing to me that Chris Davis pulled this off.
Yeah, I think we need to start this conversation, though, and be completely honest and upfront. There were many conversations that you and I had, just like anyone else in town, and at no point did we say they need to stay away from this guy at all costs. It would be a colossal mistake to sign him long term. Now, we can certainly talk about the terms that they did give him, but frankly, the player that he is now, they could have given him 6 years, $60 million, and that would still be a horrendous contract. So there is a certain part of this that we need to be fair from a standpoint of there were lots of people who wanted the Orioles to re-sign Chris Davis, and there were lots of people who didn't think there was any chance they were going to re-sign Chris Davis because of the history of the organization. And to that point, the biggest deal they had ever given out was the deal they gave Adam Jones in terms of total dollars. So I think we need to be very clear about that. I would be completely disingenuous if I'm just completely crushing them left and right. I had reservations about the deal. There's no question about that. But I don't think anyone, including the Orioles, including the smartest sabermetricians who didn't like the deal, no one thought Chris Davis was going to be this incredibly bad statistically this early in the contract. So I think it's important to at least note that much. You're going to deal with all the fallout, and the Orioles are already dealing with the fallout, and they're going to deal with this for years to come, whether it's the Angelos family continuing to own the team or the next owner. They're going to be dealing this for a long, long time, but I think
it's a very expensive mistake, and one that's not going away anytime soon. For
sure, but I think we need to be fair and not paint this as something that was completely panned by the fan base from day one. There were lots of people who said, "Yeah, 7 years, that's a long time," or yeah, $161 million. I mean, who else was out there? I mean, Detroit, even though the way it sounds, the Tigers' ownership was talked out of it, despite their interest in Chris Davis at the time. But I think we need to be careful not to just completely crush the Orioles from this as though everyone knew Chris Davis was going to become a below replacement player type of talent 2 or 3 years into the deal. That part of it's pretty unprecedented. Now, if we want to go back and look at where Chris Davis was in 2014 and what happened there, to your point, and I think that's a valid point. I think a lot of people, including a lot of fans, quite frankly, but fans, media, and certainly the Orioles, who are the ones who made the decision ultimately, I felt a lot of people overlooked the fact that he hit 196 that year. And, okay, the Adderall suspension, guys make mistakes. I mean, Nelson Cruz got popped right before the Orioles signed him, and look what he's been, not just with the Orioles that year, but with Seattle for the 4 years.
Well, the weird part was he had a legal drug that all he had to do was declare and take it,
right.
And knowing that he needed it to hit 53 home runs. That's sort of the mind-blowing part. Then he's not available. Not only did he stink, he was unavailable, and the team could have used him to win a championship. I mean, he let the team down, and then the owner went and gave him all the money. That's the shocking part to me, that Peter Angelos never forgives. He never forgets. He's not a kind individual. He's not a forgiving individual. I mean, we've seen this over 25 years. Some people would Look, the psychological balance on Angelos will be examined for years and years to come. I'm 25 years in, and I haven't figured it out. But why this guy got the money, that's otherworldly to me. I'll never figure that out.
Yeah. Now, if you want to paint the conversation that way, I'll agree with you from that context. I think there was absolutely an expectation among the fans, among media, that the Orioles would let Chris Davis walk for that reason, because you didn't give Nick Markakis a 4-year contract, because you thought 4 years was too much for Nelson Cruz, because to that point you hadn't gone out and spent big money on a free agent other than Ubaldo Jimenez, and Nelson Cruz was a 1-year pillow contract. So I think from that context, and because of what happened in 2014, and look, I don't want to say Chris Davis only hit 53 home runs because he's on Adderall. He has ADHD, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I'm especially sensitive of that as a former elementary educator who had a slew of kids over the years who had ADHD or other attention deficit disorders. It's difficult, and many of these kids who have medications, it's a struggle, whether it's side effects or whether it's needing it to be able to function in a classroom setting. So I'm empathetic of that part of it, but I think more than anything else, more than the suspension, more than the idea of letting his team down or anything like that, for him to hit 196 and to have that kind of an issue, and he didn't have the therapeutic use exemption for Adderall or whatever drug that he's been on since then for his attention deficit. But I think more than anything, it was just a red flag into his psyche that things all was not well there necessarily, or things had the potential to not be well there. And we saw that firsthand when he hit 196 in 2014, a year after he had 53 home runs and was third in the MVP voting. So if anything, that should have been a way bigger red flag, that part of it, more so than just being ticked off at the guy or anything like that, which there were some valid reasons to feel that way. So from that context, yeah, I think you can look back at this and say, why this guy as opposed to any other individual?
Yeah, it could have been any other player, but the guy who let them down, the guy who needs this drug to perform, clearly, a guy that the Rangers gave away because he had some slumpiness in him that they didn't like. I mean, I look back at that deal, at the Koji Uehara deal, and I say, why did the Rangers give him up? You know what I mean? Like, that was always a little bit, on the curve for me to say, you know what? Why were they in a hurry to get rid of a guy that could hit 30 home runs there? And I know they had other players that could do it. And how badly did they need Koji Uehara to give him a Tommy Hunter? But that was another one of those hell of a deals by McPhail. We go back to the genius of how they ever won. It's because McPhail could identify guys like him. Now, McPhail probably wouldn't have been a part to giving him $160 million, but McPhail liked him enough to bring him in.
Sure, and Chris Davis, up until this deal, was a huge surplus value for the Orioles, and the Rangers made a mistake letting him go in hindsight because of what he did over his first 4 years with the Orioles.
Yeah, he's our Arrieta, right? I mean, they gave us a 50 home run guy. I mean, it's altering for the franchise to think if Chris Davis weren't here, what would we talked about? Was that era the Adam Jones era? Was it the Buck Showalter era? If there's no Chris Davis, there wouldn't have been any of that era either, because guys that hit 50 home runs and driving under 30 runs don't grow on trees, right?
Right. And even 2012, he came on as that season went on. And remember, he was even playing right field because Nick Markakis had his thumb broken by CC Sabathia in early September that year. So his rise, his development in his first full season with the Orioles was absolutely a difference maker. And, on the flip side, but you can look at 2014 and how much of a non-factor he was for the most part that season. He had a couple decent stretches here and there. He did hit 26 home runs in 127 games, but if they have a healthy Chris Davis who's on the field, and there wasn't the issue with not being medicated for his ADHD, and even if he doesn't hit 50 home runs, let's just say he hits 38, he hits 40, whatever it is, he just has a decent year. is that the difference in putting the Orioles over the top? I don't know, because Steve Pearce ended up playing because of him, his absence, and Steve Pearce was a big part of that team. But you do look at it from a context of he was a big reason for their success in 2014. You can look at him as a reason for them coming up short. And again, I go back to this contract, and I think it's important to have the proper context. I think in isolation, the Orioles re-signing him as a guy who'd hit 53 home runs and 47 home runs in two of the previous 3 seasons, that part of it, all right. But again, to the point that you made, given what had happened in 14, why him over others, either in this organization like Manny Machado, knowing they were going to have to pay him sooner rather than later if he was going to be here, or anyone else you could have gotten out on the open market. But keep in mind, Justin Upton was a player that was talked about, and the Orioles had some interest in him. So why re-sign Chris Davis to the terms that they did compared to other guys they had either let walk out the door or other free agents that they weren't willing to make that kind of a financial commitment to? I just think we all need to be honest with ourselves as far as how we truly felt about that deal at the time, because no one, even the biggest critics of the deal, like I said, no one thought Chris Davis was going to be this bad this quickly. So that part of it is kind of historical.
But you knew it was possible off the drug, though. You did. I mean, you knew it was possible. We saw an awful year that was not injury related. It wasn't.
Okay, but even that year is so much better than what he is right now.
I understand that, but knowing that there was a dip there that you didn't need to pay. Look, the contract in isolation is bizarre because they were bidding against themselves, right?
Fair,
so,
sure.
in the end, to give him all of that money when his next best offer was what? I don't know. Did somebody insult him with a 3-year, $50 million, offer? I don't know.
I alluded to this before, and you can even go back and find reports. Ilitch, the late owner for the Tigers, there have been murmurs out there that they were in the neighborhood of giving him that much money too, but then the front office talked him out of it. And now, how far down the road that got, I've heard different things from different people. It was never a case where he was meeting with them and getting ready to sign on the dotted line in the 11th hour. They pulled the offer.
But Ilitch was certainly of the – he loved that. He loved that kind of ball player. He loved
Sure.
Mickey Tettleton. He loved those guys that hit 40 home runs. That was his thing. So,
But beyond him, beyond that team, you're right. There was no one that was even thought to be in serious conversations. I think at one point that offseason there had been some talk about the Cardinals, I want to say off the top of my head, but no one had gotten that far down the road where they were talking terms and length such as that. So I hear you. Believe me. I want to make it very clear that this isn't me forgiving the Orioles for this deal. I just want to make sure that we're all being honest, because we weren't carrying the torches the day that they announced they signed this deal. We were all saying, yeah, that's a long-term contract, and that's a heck of a lot of money, and there were some question marks about this guy. But there were also a lot of people very, very happy to see this team finally make a long-term, more lucrative financial commitment to someone. Because at that point in time, there was a thought that the Orioles would never give a 9-figure contract to anyone. So I think that context is important to at least acknowledge, and to say to some level all of us were wrong to some degree about how this would play out. I figured the last 2 or 3 years of this deal would be Ryan Howard-like, and I've said that over and over, and this probably isn't the last time I've said it. But I never fathomed that we'd be talking about, in the 4th year of this deal, Chris Davis being a -2, -3 wins above replacement kind of player and hitting below 150 as the All-Star break approaches. I never fathomed that would be a possibility, unless the guy were hurt or something weird like that, even with questions about his ADHD and medication and the fact that he had a rough season in 2014 clearly, and even going back to what he did last year. In 2017, where he had a really brutal second half of the season and hit .215, he still hit 26 home runs. But now you look at Chris Davis and you ask yourself, is he going to hit 10 home runs this season? However regular his playing time is.
Well, he went from being like this complete baseball player that you felt like you could play him at third base if you needed to because he was an athlete, that he could go out there and fake it for a while, that if you needed a pitcher in the ninth inning, he could be that guy in a 21-2 blowout. He's an athlete through all of this, and that's kind of the hardest part of this is seeing this sort of the psychology get on top of him in some sort of a Steve Sachs way because he's clearly still capable of hitting a baseball, 400 feet 38 times a year and hitting 238. He's capable of being a Dave Kingman type of baseball player, not a -2, to your point, out of big leagues kind of guy. He's still physically capable of doing this. It's now psychological, right? Yeah,
and look, his bat speed has declined a little bit. There's no question about that. And look, that's everyone. Unless you're Barry Bonds or you want to go back to that era and rehash that whole conversation, your bat speed is going to be slower at age 32 than it was at age 27 when he hit 53 home runs. So there's going to be some physical decline. That happens. Do I think the physical decline has been that dramatic that explains all this? Absolutely not. And that goes to the point you just made, how much of this I think is between the ears. And what's the remedy for that? I mean, does he see a whole team of sports psychologists? I'm not so sure things like that haven't already taken place. And I don't know that for certain, but you hear things. And look, just because the Orioles have continued to play him, and they haven't released him yet or anything like that, and we'll get to that part of the conversation as far as the future for him and how the Orioles proceed. That's not to say that they haven't exhausted a lot of avenues to try to fix this, and we saw this recently when he was benched for over a week, and he worked with Scott Coolball, he worked with Howie Clark, he worked with Brady Anderson. It was an intervention, so to speak, to try to get him fixed, and he comes back, he hits a home run in his first game, great. He hits a 3-run double in his second game, great. And then we've seen it trend back to where it was almost immediately. So
looking at him, there's no point where that dude's going to have 10 games where he's going to hit 420. He's just not. I mean, it looks like that's never going to happen where that streaky part of him where he's going to go 3 for 4 a couple nights in a row. He doesn't look like that kind of ball player anymore, and if he can't do that, he probably is going to hit 160 because he's going to probably find a fastball in the right count against the right pitcher in the right circumstance to hit one out twice a week, I guess, right? Sort of, kind of, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's looking more and more that way.
If they put him up there 35 times a week, he'll hit 1 or 2 of them out, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Through his first.
Or some long foul balls. I don't know, right?
Before the benching, he had, 4 home runs in, 57 games or something like that. So it's not like he's hitting many anymore. But, the only thing you can say, it goes back to the point you said, how much of this is mental and psychological. Is there a way for him to have some kind of breakthrough in that regard? I mean, whether it's a shrink, whether it's, I know he's a religious guy. I don't know. I mean, this is, again.
I'm going to get Tony Robbins up here for the Caps, so play with him a little bit or something.
And I'm not trying to be silly in saying that. We are dealing with some really unprecedented territory here in terms of a player of his ilk falling off to this degree. Again, we always use the Ryan Howard thing. Go back and look at what Ryan Howard was at the end of his career with the Phillies. He was not a good ball player. Let's make that very clear. But he was still a guy who was hitting 20 home runs at least, still being productive in some way. Chris Davis is so bad statistically right now, the Orioles would be a better team if he were not in the lineup. You have to be incredibly bad. I mean, he's basically become the Chris Tillman of position players.
Well, we could put a ball to Jimenez in there, too. It's not the first or the last time that they played with guys that they shouldn't be playing with because of contracts, literally. I mean, Jimenez, they propped him up for 2 years and threw him out there, including the night that the team got eliminated. After, in the fans' minds, he was already eliminated. By the way, I pulled Ryan Howard's stats up just to have some fun with it. 23 home runs, 95 RBIs, 23 home runs, 77 RBIs, 25 home runs, 59 RBIs. He batted in the 220s, struck out 180 times. The OBP was, 310, 280, whatever. He stunk. I'll give you he stunk, but he belonged still in the big leagues on a bad team. Yes.
And the Orioles would sign up in blood for that kind of production from Chris Davis.
If he could hit 23 bombs and drive in 77 next year and bat 229, they would take that. Yes.
And it's not to say that you like it, but relative to what you're seeing now, I mean, it really is a case. And look, maybe we transition now into what the future is going to hold here. He's under contract for 4 more years. They're going to pay him for 4 more years and all the deferments. That he's going to get that money, short of him deciding to retire out of
$23 million, $23 million, $23 million, and $23 million if you're doing the math. That's 19, 20, 21, and 22. $23 million a year. 23 times 4, that's $92 million, plus the $23 million, and half of that they owe him this year. They still owe him well in excess of $100, but then there's all of the future salary that's not really reflected because that deal goes on, another 10 years after that, correct?
I think he's paid through, I want to say, age 52 or something like that. I mean, the deferments are, this isn't quite Bobby Bonilla proportions, like what the Mets have done with him all these years to basically make him go away at the time. But this is along those lines. He's going to be paid.
$42 million is deferred, by the way. $42 million deferred.
Real money. And look, we're not talking about
$42 million deferred from 23 to 2037. It is a 15-year, $42 million deferment. So he'll be getting upwards of $3 million a year every year for 15 years after his career is over. So chew on that. Once they're done paying him, they still owe him $42 million more.
Good work if you can get it, right? But this is, and as much as I hear you on Jimenez and certainly others that they've let play out the string despite poor production, his production at this point in time, if we're going to assume that some sports shrink doesn't fix him or he continues to go down this path, he's not going to be on this team 4 years from now. He will be so bad that they'll have no choice but to release him. It'll go so far beyond Ubaldo Jimenez or Wade Miley or Chris Tillman or anyone you want to talk about.
Well, dude, the team's worth $800 million. They owe him over $100 million. I mean, he's worth 12% of the franchise at this point, and that's not fake. That's real math. That's that's an incredible thing when you think about it, right? He literally is worth 12% of the franchise.
So, but if he's going to continue on this path, and there's not going to be a breakthrough or any meaningful improvement, there will come a time at some point over the next 4 years, and it might be sooner than you think. I don't think it's this year, and it shouldn't be this year. They should exhaust every possible explanation, strategy, intervention, whatever, to try to fix him before you get. But because you're not winning anyway right now, and you're not going to be winning next year. So, but if he is still hitting 150 a year from now, a year and a half from now, it might be at a point at that point where it is over, and it's just a sunk cost. I would have never said that even at the beginning of this season. I would have never imagined saying something like that because I know, like you know, how the Orioles haven't been a team that's eaten many contracts. I mean, their idea of that is a year of Jay Gibbons or half a year of Bud Norris in terms of eating a deal, or
2 years of Jimenez, or or bringing Tillman back and giving him money, and then strangely not giving money to Miguel Gonzalez, and strangely giving $161 million to the guy who did not post up when Miguel Gonzalez was trying to win baseball games in the post. There's nothing congruent about any of this. It doesn't add up, I mean, none of it does, which is why it's sort of maddening in a lot of ways that over 25 years, why I'm doing this Dear Orioles thing is we sit here and we shake our heads about how cheap he was and the whole Albert Bell thing and, how the Messinas of the world get treated. And then you sit here and scratch your head about this. There's no part of this that adds up. It doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't.
No, I hear you on that, and and that even goes down to Chris Davis becoming this bad this quickly. That I still am stumped by it. I really am, and I do think it's between the ears more so than physical decline. And there's been some physical decline. As I said, with his bat speed, he doesn't run as well as he did, and those are the realities of being on the wrong side of 30. But Adam Jones is on the wrong side of 32, and you're not seeing him hit 150. So that part of it, like I said, I don't think the Orioles or anyone could have possibly imagined him becoming this bad this quickly. But what are you going to do about it? I mean, the money is spent, and you can try every possible strategy, every possible loophole. You can put him on the DL and send him to Sarasota for 6 weeks. And by the way, I think that's probably the next type of thing we'll see, assuming this continues and he doesn't start hitting any better whatsoever. I think we'll see that at some point before this season's out or going into next year, whenever. But it really does become something where even with the money being as great as it is, as lucrative as it is, as damning as it is, I think it's quite possible that 6 months ago, if you had asked me this, I would have laughed and said that's a non-starter. Of course he's going to be here, but I don't know if he's still hitting 150 a year from now. I'm not sure even the Orioles are going to continue to keep him around if he's going to be this bad. And the thought of that, when you consider how much money you owe him beyond the next 4 years with all the deferments, I mean, it is just, it's terrible. It's terrible for the now. It's terrible for the future. And there's no telling what kind of fallout could be there in terms of future free agents, future players that you want to keep in your organization. I mean, the worst thing you can do is have a mistake and then let that paralyze you for the next 20 years or however long you want to try to look at it. But this is the kind of deal that absolutely can completely hamstring you and cripple you for a long time, even in terms of just mindset for ownership, and that's not a good thing for an organization, clearly.
All right, well, we'll be talking about Chris Davis. When all this is done, right, when Buck's gone and Adam Jones is traded off to Cleveland and Machado signs with the Yankees, come March, Chris Davis will still be the part of this we're still talking about, along with everyone named Angelos, including Brady Angelos. You can find all of this out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day. Luke, of course, is at the ballpark. He'll be out in Owings Mills later on in the month as well. He is Luke at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke on Twitter. Don't forget any breaking news. You'll get it first on the WNST text service, including when they deal Manny Machado, but not when they deal Chris Davis. You'll get that first, all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. All of our Dear Orioles work up in the buyatoyota.com audio vault, as well as on the front of WNST.net, as well as in our morning newspaper that ships to you each and every morning, brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Also, the Laurel entries for this weekend in the air-conditioned club down there at Laurel Park. Get on down there and enjoy the races this weekend. Have a sandwich, grab a beer, and bet the ponies at Laurel Park. Also, on the front of our WNST.net website, you'll get the entries for Laurel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.